If I had to narrow my emergency supplies down to just 10 items to help me get through difficult times, I probably wouldn't pick the same things that dominate most survival discussions in online forums. The reality is that plenty of people store enough food to last for weeks, yet after only a few days, they already find themselves exhausted by what they're eating. Surprisingly, that's a problem that doesn't get nearly enough attention. A well-planned food reserve isn't only about storing enough calories to survive. It also needs to include foods and supplies that make meals enjoyable enough to keep eating, help preserve other ingredients for longer periods, prevent your kitchen routine from breaking down too quickly, and maintain morale when you're facing the same meals day after day. What's especially surprising is that one of the most valuable items on this list costs only around $3. It won't satisfy your hunger, and at first glance, it doesn't look like anything particularly important sitting on a shelf. But once it's gone, you quickly discover that an entire kitchen setup can begin falling apart much faster than most people ever imagine. In this video, we'll start with an item that almost everyone overlooks and work our way toward the one supply I never leave out of my own emergency storage. Number 10. Nutritional yeast. One of the strangest things about getting through difficult times is that you can technically eat enough food every single day and still feel yourself becoming less sharp mentally. The dangerous part is that this decline rarely happens all at once. Instead, it creeps in gradually through small changes that are easy to dismiss. Maybe you find yourself staring at a shelf for far too long, unable to decide what to eat. You pick up a can, read the label, and then realize moments later that you don't remember what it said. Even though you still have plenty of rice, beans, pasta, and other staples, every simple decision suddenly feels far more exhausting than it should. After one of my previous videos, a viewer shared an experience that stayed with me. They explained that their household had enough food stored to last nearly 3 weeks, and nobody ever went hungry. Yet as time passed, they noticed themselves becoming increasingly tired, forgetful, and unmotivated. They simply didn't feel like doing much of anything anymore. That may sound like an ordinary complaint, but anyone who has lived through several days without electricity, dealt with poor sleep, or eaten the same limited foods repeatedly knows how unsettling that feeling can become. Many people prepare for the possibility of hunger. Far fewer prepare for what happens when their brain simply stops performing at its best. That's one of the main reasons I always keep nutritional yeast in my emergency food storage. Nutritional yeast isn't the kind of item that attracts attention. It doesn't look impressive sitting on a shelf, and it certainly doesn't provide the same sense of security as a 50-pound bag of rice or a bucket of freeze-dried food. Still, a small container typically costs somewhere between $5 and $9, and because most people only use 1 or 2 tablespoons at a time, it can last through a surprisingly large number of meals. When kept sealed and stored in a cool, dry location, many brands remain usable for roughly 1 to 2 years. Once opened, I usually transfer mine into an airtight glass container and keep it away from humidity, heat, and direct sunlight. Its greatest advantage isn't necessarily its shelf life. The real value of nutritional yeast is that it helps fill a nutritional gap that many emergency food plans unintentionally create. When your meals consist mostly of rice, pasta, potatoes, oats, or dried beans for days or weeks at a time, you may still be consuming enough calories. What often disappears, however, is nutritional diversity. In particular, certain B vitamins, which play an important role in energy production, nervous system health, and mental performance, can become harder to obtain. Your body doesn't always send an obvious warning signal when this happens. Instead, you may simply become a little more tired, a little more irritable, a little slower to think, and slightly more prone to making mistakes. During a prolonged emergency, those small changes can lead to very real consequences. I use nutritional yeast in the simplest ways possible. I'll sprinkle it over hot rice, stir it into oatmeal or porridge, mix it into mashed potatoes, or add it to pasta, beans, soups, and broths just before serving. It has a mild, savory flavor with a subtle cheese-like quality that's often enough to keep repetitive meals from tasting exactly the same every day. One important detail is to buy a fortified variety, meaning a product that contains added B vitamins, including vitamin B12. If your diet contains very little meat, eggs, or dairy, or if you're relying heavily on shelf-stable foods for an extended period, that extra nutritional support can make a meaningful difference. Another tip is to avoid cooking nutritional yeast for long periods. I prefer to add it at the very end of the cooking process, right before eating, to preserve both its flavor and its nutritional value. One of the things I appreciate most about nutritional yeast is how little space it requires. A small container can sit quietly in the back of a kitchen cabinet for months. Almost nobody rushes out to buy it, and it's certainly not the type of item people brag about having in their emergency supplies. Number 9. Full-fat coconut milk. One of the biggest weaknesses in many emergency food supplies is something that rarely gets mentioned. People often store plenty of starches and shelf-stable staples, but very little that makes those foods feel comforting, satisfying, or genuinely enjoyable to eat. As stressful situations drag on, people often sleep less, drink less water, and end up eating the same meals repeatedly. And when that happens, appetite can disappear much faster than most people expect. It's not something people usually talk about openly. Instead, they simply start eating less. They leave part of their meal untouched. They push their plate aside earlier than usual and say something you've probably heard before. "I'm just not that hungry." But during an emergency, skipping meals isn't a minor issue. Every missed meal means less energy, lower morale, and reduced physical and mental endurance. That's exactly why I consider full-fat coconut milk one of the most valuable items to keep in long-term food storage. A single can typically costs between $3 and $5, yet it has the ability to completely transform inexpensive staple foods such as rice, potatoes, oatmeal, pasta, beans, and porridge. Sometimes adding just a few spoonfuls is enough to change the entire experience of eating. Dry foods become softer and easier to eat. Thin dishes develop a creamy texture. Bland meals suddenly feel more filling and comforting. A simple bowl of porridge gains a richness that makes it feel like real comfort food. Plain white rice no longer tastes dry and uninviting, and mashed potatoes stop feeling like something you're forcing yourself to eat. But the real value of coconut milk isn't simply its flavor or texture, it's the fat content. When people build emergency food reserves, they often focus heavily on calories while overlooking the importance of dietary fat. Fat doesn't just help meals feel more satisfying for longer periods, it also plays a critical role in helping the body absorb fat-soluble nutrients from vegetables, seaweed, spices, and other foods that may be part of your diet. A meal made entirely from starches can fill your stomach quickly, but the energy it provides often rises and falls just as fast. Adding even a modest amount of fat can make that same meal feel more balanced, more comforting, and far less like a chore you have to force yourself to finish. Whenever I buy coconut milk, I always choose the full-fat version and avoid the reduced-fat alternatives. In everyday life, lighter products may suit some people's preferences. But in an emergency situation, a diluted version isn't what you're looking for. What matters is having a product with enough richness to improve an entire meal. In terms of storage, unopened canned coconut milk typically remains good for about 2 to 5 years when kept in a cool, dry location away from direct sunlight and excessive heat. If you open a can and notice a thick layer of cream sitting on top with liquid underneath, don't assume it's spoiled. That's a completely normal separation process. Simply shake the can before opening or stir the contents together afterward. I usually add coconut milk toward the end of cooking. It works well in porridge, soups, rice dishes, mashed potatoes, pasta, oatmeal, and even simple broths. If you have any leftover, store it in a sealed container in the refrigerator and use it within a few days. Another useful option is to freeze small portions so you can add them later to soups, sauces, or hot cereals. Coconut milk isn't the kind of supply item that people proudly display when showing off their emergency pantry. Instead, it's the ingredient that makes the cheapest foods you own taste like something you actually want to eat. Number 8. TVP, textured vegetable protein. As people get older, one of the biggest challenges during an emergency isn't always a shortage of food. Sometimes the real problem is not having enough of the right kind of food to help the body maintain its strength and resilience. You may still have plenty of staples left. The pantry still contains rice, pasta, oats, potatoes, and canned beans. On paper, it looks like there's more than enough to eat. But eventually, you begin to notice subtle changes. Lifting a container of water feels more tiring than it used to. Standing up from a chair takes a little more effort. Even carrying a pot of soup from the stove to the table suddenly requires more attention and energy. There isn't a dramatic warning sign or an obvious moment when something changes. Instead, your body quietly starts telling you that its reserves are running low. This is one of the most common mistakes I see in emergency food storage plans. People often stockpile large amounts of carbohydrates but overlook the importance of shelf-stable protein. Carbohydrates are excellent for providing energy. Protein, however, serves a different purpose. It's essential for maintaining muscle mass, recovering from physical exertion, and keeping your body functioning when you have to carry supplies, clean up after a storm, care for family members, or stay awake during a long night without electricity. This becomes even more important after the age of 50, when the body naturally begins to lose muscle over time. Going several days with insufficient protein can affect physical strength much faster than many people realize. That's one of the reasons I always keep TVP, or textured vegetable protein, in my emergency pantry. At first glance, TVP doesn't look particularly impressive. It's dry, lightweight, and resembles cereal flakes or small granules. But once it's rehydrated with hot liquid, it expands and develops a texture that's surprisingly similar to ground meat. That versatility is exactly what makes it so useful. A bag of TVP generally costs between $4 and $8. It weighs very little, requires no refrigeration, takes up minimal storage space, and doesn't depend on electricity. In its original packaging, many varieties remain usable for 1 to 2 years. When stored properly in an airtight container, a mylar bag, or a vacuum-sealed package with an oxygen absorber, its shelf life can extend significantly longer. Preparing TVP is also remarkably simple. One thing I've learned, though, is never to rehydrate it with plain water if flavor matters. Instead, I use broth, bouillon, salt, dried garlic, tomato powder, chili powder, or whatever seasonings fit the meal I'm making. Within 5 to 10 minutes, the TVP absorbs those flavors and becomes much more appealing. After draining any excess liquid, it can be added to almost anything. One of its biggest advantages is its ability to stretch more expensive ingredients. You can mix TVP into chili to create more servings while using less ground beef. It works well in spaghetti sauce, giving the dish the texture and heartiness of a traditional meat sauce. It can become taco filling when combined with seasonings, onions, and a little oil. It also blends easily into sloppy joes, allowing a small amount of meat to feed more people. Even when used without meat, TVP can be stirred into rice, beans, soups, and pasta dishes to ensure your meals contain more than just starches. I'm not suggesting that TVP tastes exactly like ground beef. It doesn't, and that's not really the point. Its purpose isn't to perfectly imitate meat. Its purpose is to help meals remain filling, maintain adequate protein intake, and preserve the feeling of eating a complete meal when fresh meat is unavailable, refrigeration has failed, or food prices have become too expensive. Number 7. Dried seaweed. A small package of dried seaweed isn't going to keep you full for another day, and it certainly won't replace a bag of rice or a bucket of beans. What it can provide, however, is something that even 50 pounds of rice cannot. That's exactly why dried seaweed has earned a permanent place in my emergency food storage. At first, this choice may seem a little unusual. When most people think about preparedness, they picture foods that are heavy, inexpensive, and filling, things like rice, beans, pasta, flour, and potatoes. Those staples are absolutely essential, but they all have a common limitation. They're excellent at filling your stomach, but they're not always as effective at supplying everything else your body needs to function well. It's entirely possible to eat enough calories and still feel physically drained. You can avoid hunger while still experiencing mental fatigue, low energy, or that nagging sense that something is missing. You might have shelves packed with food and yet still lack a few important nutrients that help keep your body operating efficiently. This is what I think of as the mineral gap, and dried seaweed is one of the simplest and most space-efficient ways to help address it. I don't consider seaweed a primary food source, and I don't eat it simply for the sake of eating seaweed. Instead, I think of it as a strategic addition that improves meals that would otherwise be too plain or nutritionally limited. A few pieces of nori added to hot rice, a small amount of wakame stirred into soup, or several strips of seaweed mixed into porridge or noodles can make a surprising difference. You don't need much. The goal isn't to dominate the meal, but to make it feel a little more complete. The greatest value of seaweed comes from the minerals it contains, particularly nutrients such as iodine and magnesium, which aren't always abundant in common pantry staples. Iodine plays an important role in thyroid function and how the body regulates energy. Magnesium contributes to muscle function, heart rhythm, and the stability of the nervous system. There's no need to turn this into a complicated nutrition lecture. A simpler way to think about it is this. When you eat mostly starches for an extended period, your body can start functioning like a machine that's running low on lubrication. It still works, but not as smoothly or efficiently as it should. Another advantage of dried seaweed is that it's incredibly compact. A package of nori, wakame, or kelp weighs very little and occupies almost no storage space. In many stores, a package typically costs somewhere between $4 and $7, depending on the variety and brand. That might seem expensive if you're comparing cost by weight, but seaweed isn't a food that's meant to be eaten in large quantities. Since you only use a small amount at a time, a single package can last through a surprisingly large number of meals. Number 6. Chia seeds. Tom is 63 years old and lives in Texas. He has an unusual routine that kicks in whenever he hears troubling news reports about hurricanes, power outages, inflation, or rising food prices. He doesn't turn on a generator. He doesn't start packing supplies. Instead, he walks into the kitchen and opens the pantry. He grabs a cracker, then maybe a handful of cereal, a spoonful of peanut butter, a banana. Before long, an hour has passed, and he's back in the pantry again. One day, he said something that really stayed with me. "I don't think I'm actually hungry. I just feel calmer when I know there's something in my stomach." After spending time talking with experts who study consumer behavior and stress responses, I realized that Tom's reaction isn't unusual at all. People don't eat solely because they're physically hungry. Very often, they eat because eating creates a sense of comfort, control, and security. And that's one of the hidden reasons emergency food supplies sometimes disappear faster than expected. It's not always because there wasn't enough food to begin with. Sometimes it's because of dozens of small moments throughout the day when someone thinks, maybe I'll just have a little more. That's where chia seeds become surprisingly valuable. They're not particularly exciting. They don't attract the same attention as freeze-dried meals or expensive emergency food buckets. You won't usually find them featured as the star item in preparedness discussions or displayed prominently in grocery stores. But despite their simplicity, chia seeds do something extremely useful. They help extend the amount of time you feel satisfied between meals. When mixed with liquid, chia seeds absorb water and form a natural gel. That gel helps retain moisture, provides soluble fiber, and can make meals feel filling for much longer periods. In addition to that, chia seeds contain plant-based omega-3 fatty acids, protein, magnesium, calcium, and a variety of other nutrients that help break up the nutritional monotony of an emergency diet. No, chia seeds won't transform a bowl of oatmeal into a steak dinner, but they can turn a breakfast that leaves you hungry an hour later into one that keeps you comfortable until lunchtime. During a prolonged emergency, that's a significant advantage. A 1-pound bag of chia seeds generally costs between $6 and $10. Since most recipes only require 1 or 2 tablespoons, that single bag can provide dozens, or even hundreds, of servings. When stored properly in an airtight container or vacuum-sealed bag and kept in a cool, dry place away from heat and sunlight, chia seeds can often maintain good quality for 2 to 4 years. Using them is much easier than many people assume. You can soak them in water for about 15 minutes to create a gel, stir them into overnight oats, mix them into hot cereal or porridge, add them to powdered milk, sprinkle them over yogurt, or incorporate them into breads, pancakes, and thick soups. One method I particularly like is adding a spoonful of chia seeds to oatmeal before going to bed. Number 5. Ghee. One of the most overlooked signs of a truly well-prepared kitchen isn't the amount of food it contains. It's the number of problems it avoids creating. Many people spend a lot of time calculating how many pounds of rice they have stored, how many cans are on the shelf, or how many weeks their supply of beans and pasta might last. But there's another question that often gets ignored. What happens when every meal becomes dry, repetitive, and increasingly difficult to enjoy? Sometimes the solution is surprisingly simple: having a reliable source of shelf-stable fat. That's why I believe ghee deserves a place in almost any long-term food storage plan. Ghee is a form of clarified butter that's been processed to remove most of its water and milk solids, leaving behind a fat that is considerably more stable than ordinary butter. It tolerates high temperatures well, requires less dependence on refrigeration, and fits naturally into situations where electricity may be unavailable or kitchen temperatures become difficult to control. What makes ghee so valuable isn't that it's a luxury ingredient or a specialty food. Its real strength is that a single spoonful can completely change the experience of eating a meal. A little melted over hot rice softens the grains and adds richness. Stirred into porridge, it creates a deeper, more satisfying flavor. Mixed into stewed beans, mashed potatoes, or textured vegetable protein, it helps transform foods that might otherwise feel dry, crumbly, or difficult to enjoy. From a nutritional perspective, ghee also provides a concentrated source of fat, which can help meals remain satisfying for longer periods. In addition, dietary fat plays an important role in helping the body absorb fat-soluble nutrients found in vegetables, seaweed, seasonings, and many other foods that may be part of an emergency diet. When your meals revolve around starches for days or weeks at a time, even a small amount of fat added strategically can make those meals feel far more balanced and comforting. In the United States, a typical jar of ghee often costs between $8 and $15. At first glance, that may seem expensive. But because you usually need only a small spoonful at a time, a single jar can improve dozens of meals. When kept unopened and stored in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight, many commercial varieties can maintain good quality for approximately 1 to 2 years. Using ghee couldn't be much simpler. It works well in rice, soups, porridge, mashed potatoes, stewed beans, pasta dishes, skillet breads, and even rehydrated textured vegetable protein. In many cases, just a small amount is enough to make a noticeable difference. One practical tip is to always use a clean, dry utensil when scooping from the jar. If you live alone or in a smaller household, it may also make sense to buy smaller containers or divide a larger quantity into multiple jars. That way, you're not repeatedly exposing the same container to air and moisture. Ghee won't increase the size of your food supply. What it does is make the most basic and repetitive foods in your pantry feel worth eating. And during a prolonged emergency, that's an enormous advantage. Number 4. Whole wheat berries. As long as grocery store shelves remain fully stocked with bread, cereal, crackers, and other convenience foods, most people never give much thought to whole wheat berries. But when bread prices begin climbing, cereal aisles start emptying. Flour purchases become restricted, and the familiar products you've always relied on become harder to find. An uncomfortable realization can set in. You may have plenty of food in your kitchen, but very few actual ingredients. That's one of the main reasons I believe whole wheat berries deserve a place in long-term food storage. They're not a ready-made food or a convenience product. They're a foundational ingredient, and foundational ingredients provide a level of flexibility that processed foods simply can't match. If you soak whole wheat berries overnight and cook them until they're tender, they become a filling and nutritious hot cereal. Grind them coarsely, and you have the basis for a hearty breakfast grain. Grind them into a fine powder, and you've created flour that can be used for bread, pancakes, flatbreads, and countless other recipes. Even with nothing more than flour, water, and a little salt, you can prepare a simple meal on a skillet when your options start becoming limited. And if conditions permit, whole wheat berries can even be sprouted, providing a source of freshness and variety that's often missing from long-term food supplies. From a nutritional standpoint, whole wheat berries offer advantages that many processed grain products no longer provide. Because they retain both the bran and the germ, they contain fiber, plant-based protein, B vitamins, and important minerals such as iron, magnesium, and zinc. In other words, they do more than simply fill your stomach. They help create meals with a stronger nutritional foundation than many highly refined foods. Another benefit is cost. When purchased in larger quantities, whole wheat berries are often surprisingly affordable, especially when you consider how many different meals and ingredients a single bag can produce. This isn't the kind of food that attracts attention or looks impressive in a preparedness video. Its value comes from something much more practical: versatility. One bag of whole wheat berries can become dozens of different meals, depending on what you need at the time. The most important rule for storing them is simple: keep them dry. Store wheat berries in airtight containers, mylar bags, or food-grade buckets with tightly sealed lids. For long-term storage, adding oxygen absorbers and keeping them in a cool, dark, and dry environment can dramatically extend their shelf life while protecting them from moisture, insects, and other storage problems. When properly stored, whole wheat berries can remain usable for many years, often far longer than pre-ground flour, which gradually loses quality over time. Flour gives you one ingredient. Breakfast cereal gives you one type of meal. Bread gives you one finished product. Number 3. Vinegar. A bottle of vinegar isn't going to satisfy your hunger or provide a meaningful number of calories. But after spending several days eating rice, beans, pasta, canned foods, and the same basic meals over and over again, you'll start to understand why such a simple item can make an entire kitchen feel more functional and more comfortable. I don't think of vinegar as a food staple in the traditional sense. I think of it as a tool that helps slow the gradual decline that often happens during prolonged periods of relying on stored food. One of its biggest advantages is that it can help extend the usefulness of certain foods. With little more than vinegar, water, salt, and a small amount of sugar, vegetables like cucumbers, carrots, cabbage, red onions, and radishes can be turned into quick pickled side dishes that add flavor, variety, and freshness to otherwise repetitive meals. And when your diet revolves largely around starches and shelf-stable foods, even a small amount of acidity can dramatically improve the eating experience. From a nutritional perspective, vinegar contributes very little in terms of calories, protein, or fat. Its value comes from somewhere else entirely: its acidity, its flavor, and its ability to improve the foods around it. A splash of vinegar added to a salad, a bean dish, a stew, a sauce, or a jar of pickled vegetables can help balance richness, cut through saltiness, and reduce the heavy, monotonous feeling that repetitive meals often create. Vinegar also has practical uses beyond cooking. White vinegar, in particular, can help remove mineral deposits, reduce certain household odors, and clean a variety of everyday kitchen surfaces. That said, it's important to remember that vinegar is not a universal disinfectant and should not be considered a replacement for stronger cleaning products in situations where proper disinfection is necessary. It's also essential never to mix vinegar with other household cleaning chemicals. A large bottle of vinegar typically costs somewhere between $3 and $5 depending on the variety and brand. For a relatively small investment, you get a product that can help prepare meals, preserve vegetables, improve flavor, reduce odors, and assist with maintaining the kitchen itself. If you're looking for the most versatile option, white vinegar is usually the best choice. If you expect to use it more frequently in salads, cooking, or diluted beverages, you may prefer the flavor of apple cider vinegar. Storage is straightforward. Once opened, simply keep the bottle tightly sealed and store it in a cool place away from direct sunlight. White vinegar, in particular, is remarkably stable and can maintain its quality for an extremely long time. Some supplies make your pantry look fuller. Vinegar does something different. It makes your kitchen more resilient. Number 2. Bouillon cubes. On the first day of an emergency or disruption, most people can eat whatever is available without giving it much thought. By the second day, however, the meals begin to feel familiar. And by the third day, the real challenge often isn't hunger at all. It's mental fatigue. You look down at another serving of rice, beans, pasta, potatoes, or reheated canned food, and suddenly you don't feel like eating. Not because you've had enough, but because your brain has grown tired of the same flavors, the same smells, and the same types of meals repeating day after day. That's the moment when something as simple as a bouillon cube can become surprisingly important. Drop a cube into a pot of hot water, and within minutes the aroma changes the entire atmosphere of the kitchen. Plain hot water becomes broth. Leftover rice turns into a comforting porridge. Dry noodles become soup. Canned beans taste more substantial. Even frozen vegetables can start to feel like part of a complete meal rather than an afterthought. Bouillon cubes aren't a major source of calories or nutrition. They won't replace protein, vegetables, or staple grains. But they provide something that's often overlooked in emergency planning. They make basic food easier to keep eating. And during difficult times, maintaining the desire to eat can be a form of resilience all by itself. A package of bouillon cubes is typically inexpensive, takes up very little storage space, and has a relatively long shelf life. Depending on your preferences and dietary needs, you can choose chicken, beef, vegetable, or lower sodium varieties. That last detail can be particularly important for older adults, since many bouillon products contain substantial amounts of sodium. One useful habit I've developed is to avoid using an entire cube immediately. Instead, I break off half, taste the dish, and then decide whether it needs more. It's surprising how often a portion of a single cube is enough to rescue a pot of soup, a bowl of rice, a batch of beans, mashed potatoes, or a meal that nobody in the house wanted to eat anymore. Storage is straightforward. Keep bouillon cubes in a cool, dry location. Seal the package after opening, and protect them from humidity whenever possible. If the cubes become soft, begin leaking, or develop an unusual odor, it's generally best to discard them. When stored properly, many varieties remain usable at least through the date printed on the package and often maintain good quality for quite some time. Sometimes, improving a meal doesn't require adding more food. Sometimes, all it takes is a familiar smell that convinces your brain it's willing to eat again. Number 1. Ginger. The item I keep tucked away more carefully than almost anything else isn't at the top of this list because it's expensive, rare, or difficult to find. It's number 1 for a different reason. By the time you realize how much you need it, your body is often already trying to tell you that something isn't right. Maybe you stand up from the table and have to pause for a moment to steady yourself against the counter. Your head feels slightly light. Your hands are colder than usual. Your stomach is technically empty, but the thought of eating another serving of rice, beans, or canned food feels exhausting. You try to force yourself to eat because you know you need the calories. But sometimes your body simply refuses to cooperate. That's why ginger holds the number 1 spot on my list. Ginger isn't a substitute for real food, and it certainly won't solve hunger. What it can do, however, is make difficult periods of eating a little easier to manage. During times when meals become repetitive, fresh ingredients are scarce, canned foods dominate the menu, or stress levels remain high for days at a time, a small amount of ginger can make a surprising difference in how comfortable you feel. A cup of warm ginger tea can be soothing when your stomach feels unsettled. A few thin slices added to porridge can make a bland meal feel lighter and more appealing. Freshly minced ginger can be stirred into soups, broths, beans, sautéed vegetables, canned meats, or fish, instantly adding aroma, warmth, and flavor. From a nutritional standpoint, ginger isn't important because of its calories, protein, or fat content. Its value comes from something less obvious: its distinctive flavor, its comforting aroma, and the role it can play in helping meals feel more tolerable when you're tired of eating the same foods. When every meal starts tasting identical, ginger can help food feel interesting again. Fresh ginger root is usually inexpensive, and a single piece can be used many times. You can slice it for tea, mince it into meals, simmer it in broth, or freeze individual portions for future use. When stored properly and kept dry in the refrigerator, fresh ginger often lasts for several weeks. For longer-term storage, dried ginger, ground ginger powder, or unsweetened ginger tea can be excellent alternatives. Regardless of the form you choose, it's important to protect it from moisture and light, and to keep containers tightly sealed after opening. One important point deserves emphasis. Ginger should never be treated as a cure-all. If someone experiences severe dizziness, chest pain, fainting, significant dehydration, or symptoms that continue to worsen, the appropriate response is to seek medical care, not to make another cup of ginger tea. But in an ordinary kitchen, ginger serves a different purpose. It's one of those small ingredients that helps keep people functioning when circumstances become difficult.